as well as our Memories and Mimosas brunch in July, are all in the latest newsletter, summarized by John Edwards in our latest newsletter. Also online at both on our website and on the AOI channel on YouTube. So if there's no objections, I will have those be our official record of both our June and our July meetings. Any objection to that? All right, that is done. I don't believe, Bill, we are not voting on new members? We don't have any numbers to vote in. We've got everybody in. We can... Not since we voted people in. Okay, so we are good with that. Then I'm going to go right on to announcements, because we have a good and fun announcement for AOI. AOI as an organization has been chosen to receive the Committee of 100 Lifetime Achievement Award. And I will read what it says as to why. In recognition of our nearly 160 years of service to Washington, D.C.'s history and preserving its archives, records, and places that our history happened. And importantly, to ensure our city's history is not forgotten by generations to come. So we are going to be receiving that in October. And it was Charles Robertson, who is a member of AOI, as well as a member of the Committee of 100, who nominated AOI for the prestigious award. So we are going to be receiving that on October 17th. They're going to be having a ceremony for that, and we'll post information about that on our website in case, I know we actually have some people who are members of both, in case you're interested in coming to that, but also to let you see what is going on with that as well. Other members, we have a lot of members kind of making news and making DC history. So Denise Vogt and Frank Leone, who are co-founders and co-chairs of the Foggy Bottom Association History Project, who have created the Mapping Foggy Bottom Project that you can find on the DC History Center website, which if you have not seen it, you can go onto the website, you can click onto any of the buildings that are within the historic district of Foggy Bottom and get information about the history of the building, the people who lived there. It's an interactive map, and it's the first of its kind. So they are doing some great history, but they have also managed to secure digitized versions of the Foggy Bottom News, which is a semi-annual or semi-monthly newsletter from Foggy Bottom that has been around since 1958. So it used to be that you would have to go to research those either to GW Library or to Washingtoniana, and now they are digitized if you want to search them, if you are searching for either Foggy Bottom history or genealogical history. They are digitized on the Internet Archive website through the GW Library, and you are able to read those at home in your pajamas as God and historians intended you to be able to do research through there. We on our website will also have information about our own oral history project, talking about people's history, and that is slowly, and that's my fault. The slow part is my fault. We are slowly getting up and running to be able to collect AOI oral history, which is focusing on family history, as AOI does, and our family connections to DC and family memories. And we have several ways that you, if you're interested, will be able to contribute your oral history. One, having somebody come and take it for you and do an interview. Two, recording it yourself, about yourself, or having somebody else record it. Or three, being able to fill out, if you don't want to have an audio or video record, fill out the information yourself and do kind of a written interview. We want to collect as much information as we can about AOI history members, but also to be able to leave a record of all of these family connections, because we do have so many of those, not just within the city, but also between AOI members themselves and connections that we're excited to try to make. So there will be information about how to do all of that on our website, and if you're interested in participating in that ahead of time, you certainly can contact me, and I can give you the information before it might be on our website. I am going to ask Bill to give us a quick update, if he has it, on the 16th Street tree memorial.
Well, I don't have anything prepared, but if you followed us for any amount of time, you know that through the valiant efforts of Barbara Bates and others, we're trying to put the finishing touches on the story of the 16th Street Tree Memorial. We dedicated the commemorative plaque or wayside on Memorial Day 2022. The big mystery that remains is that in 1922, 23 additional names were added to the memorial for which we can find no records. Now, Barbara's in touch with the American Forest Association's archives down in North Carolina for whatever reason, but we hope that they might have the names of those 23 because we've got all the other 507 plus one, but not of those 23, except that we came upon someone that contacted us through the website whose father-in-law had the copper shield for a how do you go backwards? Here, before now, previously unknown Daniel Benzinger. He was not on any of our lists. So Daniel Benzinger is one of the 23. We just need the other 22. So that's sort of the unresolved issues with the 16th Street Tree Memorial. In the meantime, since our last meeting in June, I think you'll recall I reported that I found one of the copper shields on eBay and purchased it in AOI's name. And I went down and donated that to the accessioned it or whatever, to the DC archives a few weeks ago and handed it over to Lopez Matthews. And then in the meantime, another person that had contacted us through the website, hold on a second, I don't have enough hands here, Ted Sept, S-A-B-A-T-E, he had a shield in his possession for Robert Lindsay Edmonds, United States Navy, and at our urging, he donated that to the DC archives. So the one that we acquired, the one he has, one in Phil Mendelssohn's office are the only three that we sort of have control over the DC archives. And then the holder of the one for Daniel Benzinger, we're still trying to convince him through his son-in-law, through periodic emails and twistings of the knife, that he donate that, so that at least we would have Daniel Benzinger's as well. And the other interesting thing is Benzinger's descendants have reached out to us saying, we didn't know that our third great uncle, 4 times removed or whatever, was memorialized on this. And of course they see his shield, because I have a picture of the shield, we just don't have the shield. So we've even made genealogical connections that way. So the big mystery remains, who are those other 22, and we'll continue to work on that. I mean, I've drilled down through Library of Congress, all, ProQuest, all the newspapers of the time, and the Evening Star has a picture of a young woman standing on a ladder holding a scroll that allegedly has all 530 names on it, but there's no corresponding article that says, and that was on the occasion of the additional 23 being added. That was 1922. But there's nothing with that article that says who the other 23 were. So they may forever remain a mystery, or we'll take some of the names that we have that are we have names, but they're not on the DC Memorial, and they're not on the DC 16th Street Memorial, and maybe at some point, before I'm pushing up daisies, we'll just, elect them and say, the missing 22 are among these people, and just sort of welcome them into the memorial, in that way. So that's the update. So thank you, Ted Sept, for sending your shield to the DC archives and sharing it with the people of DC.
Well, and it's perfect timing if those of you don't know that the World War I Memorial has now been completed. The sculpture has been installed at the World War I. Has anybody been down there to see the new sculpture? Yes? It's worth seeing? Worth seeing. They've had some media coverage lately on it, but it is now complete. So this is it's nice symmetry to have us looking at our World War I DC memorial, as well as looking at the new World War I memorial that's down there. Terrific. Events that are going on. A few things to note. Speaking of dedications and memorials and markers, this Saturday from 10 to 12, there's going to be a dedication of a historical marker in Friendship Heights. It is in honor of a local story. It's about Washington's early 20th century black community. In 1906, there were 4 black businessmen who bought 31 acres along Wisconsin Avenue. I hear an O, so you know what I'm talking about. Wisconsin Avenue it was supposed to be called a suburb called Belmont. The project ended up collapsing about 3 years later when the Chevy Chase Land Company refused to release the title to the land, and they could no longer create this land that had already many of the lots had already been sold. And this really does kind of foreshadow the coming struggle over housing segregation in DC. Hyrek House Director and AOI board member Kim Bender, as well as Neil Flanagan, DC researcher and historian, have been working on this for 7 years, looking at the project, writing articles. There's currently an exhibit that's there. It's on Wisconsin Avenue, right across from where the liquor store Paul's was, right by what used to be Mazza Gallery in that area. And they're going to now dedicate a marker so that will be there for all time. So that is open to the public, Saturday 10 to 12. And if anybody is interested in going to that, Kim asks that you email her at kimberlybender@gmail.com, or ask me, I can give you her email, and you can be part of that. It has a nice connection to, as Tim Hannibal has been talking about, his research into African-American communities in Chevy Chase, and that had been taken over by eminent domain, and in his talk that we had with James Fisher. So if you are interested in that, number one, you can look up Belmont, and number two, you can look at our YouTube channel to take a listen to that presentation that we had from last year. Next Saturday and Sunday, if you have not been to one before, there is the Art All Night. I don't even know what to call it, program that is existing. It goes on in all 8 wards, and it starts at 7 p.m. at night and goes to 3 o'clock in the morning. And there's literally art in the streets in every neighborhood. And there's performance art, literary arts, visual arts, restaurants that are open, stores that open up. And it's a way to get people into the neighborhoods and experience them and experience arts in DC. So if you're seems like a great date night. So if you're looking for something for next weekend, the 27th and 28th, that is going on. October 17th, that's going to be a big day. That's also our next AOI lunch. At the Arts Club of DC, there's going to be Paris by Midnight and Beyond. It is a musical event, and it is with Steve Washington. Cliftine Jones is one of the organizers of that, our member. Steve Washington, I have that right? Yes, okay. And if you are interested in going to that, you can go to the Arts Club of DC website and get some more information from that. But there will be songs, there will be drinks, there will be refreshments. So you can take a look for that online. The Dr. Bacon House, which I think we have some cross members that are involved with that as well, is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. So they have a whole slew of events coming up, many of which focus on DC history as well as the house history that might be of interest to everybody. One of our members, Terry Walsh, you also? Yes, Cliftine? Arts Club of Washington. So Google Arts Club of Washington, not DC. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. So one of our members, Terry Walsh, is the historian in resident at Doc House, and he is organizing some of these events. On November 21st, there's going to be an evening reception and panel discussion about Lafayette Square called the President's Neighborhood. Two other of our members are going to be part of that panel, John DeFerrari and Frank Leone. And they're going to be talking about the 2 centuries of change on Lafayette Square in November. We'll put some information on that on our website too. That is in person, that you can attend. It's also virtual if you would also rather watch that from home. So we'll put that on our website. Lastly, vote. So I have flyers out there for those of you who have not double or triple checked your registration to vote for the upcoming presidential election. As we know, I'm sure every single person in this room knows the year that DC residents got the chance to vote for the presidential election, 1964 with the 23rd Amendment. So, people work too hard to not vote in DC, but also if you need information for Maryland and Virginia, it's on the table as you leave as well. There's also information in there it's nonpartisan information about all of the races across the country. You just put your information in there. It'll give you all of your down ballot information. So from Board of Education to the president, make sure you're out there. Register to vote, make a plan to vote, and vote. I think early ballots are coming out pretty soon in the mail. So keep an eye out for those. Our next lunch on October 17th is going to be with Laura Lavelle, who is with us today on Oak Hill Cemetery. And she is going to be, appropriately enough for Halloween, the month of Halloween. She's going to be talking about the history of the cemetery, and she also has written a book about the cemetery, which she will be bringing with her to sign for us if you would like to come to buy them at that time as well. So that is October 17th. I'm going to pass it on to Nelson with trivia questions. And I can't wait to find out if it's going to be about Italian Americans or if it's going to be about voting. I'm guessing it's one of those two. Or both. Or Joe Grano. One of those.
There you go. Yep, I'm honoring Joe Grano today. Well, as you know, I've been pushing Senate beer. The Heinrich Brewery is still operating, and I like to keep it operating. Part of each sale of a can goes to the preservation fund of the Heinrich Mansion. So not only are you having a beer, you're doing historic preservation at the same time. And also, at the next meeting, anybody who wants to try one of these beers, put me on the tab. It's on me at the bar. Okay? There you go. So the first trivia question is based on the beer. In 1890, you could go into virtually any pub in the District of Columbia and get a bottle of Heinrich beer. How much did you have to pay in 1890 for a bottle of Heinrich beer? Who said a nickel? You're the winner. Have you won before? I should have said you have. Oh, well.
She said a nickel.
Would you like to designate somebody? Okay. You're the winner. Okay, and I'm glad it was a woman because we've had men win a lot of these prizes. I'm glad to see it getting around. Okay, my second is Joe Grano, and about him. He created a organization called the Constantino Brumidi Society, and he promoted Brumidi and his works here, and Italian Americans overall. When he died, there was a very good article, obituary in the Voce Italiana, which we have copies of here. He died about 7 years ago now. And one of his first projects was to rehabilitate the grave of Brumidi. He is buried in the District of Columbia. Can anyone tell me which cemetery? Well, okay, he's got the location. Does anybody have the name? I guess he's got to get it. Glenwood Cemetery. And Joe was a very big promoter, as I say, of Brumidi. And his story, his immigrant story. And when we had we went out there several times to clean up the grave. And he spoke at one of those times we were out there cleaning up the grave, and we planted some flowers a couple of times. I haven't been there recently. I don't get around as well as I used to, like many of us. But anyway, he said this about immigration. Constantino Brumidi had a lot of anti-immigration slurs made about him. There were people that said, "Oh, he was a lousy artist." And there was even a movement after he was dead to paint over some of his works and commission somebody to do it all over. And fortunately, a woman came forward in the 1950s when there was a big campaign to do some of this, paint over some of his works. Myrtle Cheney Murdoch, who was the wife of a congressman from Arizona, went to the Speaker of the House and said, this has got to stop. He's very important. His works are wonderful. She started making tours of his works on the Hill. And he got the Speaker of the House to support a resolution to put a marker on his grave, which is still out there this day, a bronze marker, very nice. And the Speaker of the House in '52 actually went to the dedication of that. But this is what Joe Grano said about Brumidi and immigration in one of our times out there at the grave. It's very short, I'll read it. And I think it tells us a lot about what's going on in the public debate today about immigrants. Joe Grano said, Constantino Brumidi is the classical success story of the immigrant. Someone who takes his skills from the country of his birth and betters his life in America while enriching his new country because of his individual efforts. I think Brumidi personifies all the immigrants who have ever come to the United States of America. I have a few copies of an article about Joe and his organization. If you'd like have a couple copies, extra copies, if you'd like to read more about Joe and his activities concerning the Italian American community here in Washington. Thank you. And remember, next meeting, it's on me.
Okay, Nelson never disappoints. I was joking about Joe Grano as a question, and there you had one as part of the trivia question. Well, it goes to also show you how connected all of our organizations are with other organizations in DC, as well as people who have certainly been here for many generations. And is connected to what we're going to hear about from our speaker today, Liz DiGregorio, about the Italian-American community. Liz is the co-founder of the Italian-American Museum of DC, which is one of the newest museums in DC. And it's a fascinating story about how this even came into creation and how you make a modern museum in DC. But that is not Liz's first career. Liz had a 30-year career in emergency management at the federal level. She held numerous senior level positions at FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security, including FEMA Chief of Staff during September 11th, 2001 terror attacks. And she had a White House assignment in 2002 that created a nationwide citizen preparedness program, to which I am grateful because I actually have taken that preparedness program, and I suggest everybody takes a CERT program, which is free through FEMA on disaster preparedness, and had no idea that Liz was part of creating that. So thank you for that. Her second career was at the American Red Cross in DC, where she led to the creation of the Pillowcase Project, which is a nationwide youth preparedness program sponsored by the Disney Foundation, also a disaster preparedness program for younger people. In 2019, she was part of the Casa Italiana Sociocultural Center, Inc., board of directors, and the team that designed and developed and now operates the Robert Facchina Italian-American Museum of Washington, D.C. When the museum opened in 2021, Liz volunteered to serve as the director of the museum, and today she volunteers at the museum to help whenever and wherever she can. She is a graduate of the Colorado College as an undergrad, and the University of North Texas for her MPA. Her Italian roots hail from Italy's Abruzzo region. So I give you a warm welcome to Mia Paesana, Liz DiGregorio. I am Italian and I just mispronounced her name. Liz Gregorio. Sorry about that. Of course. Sorry.
As long as it's a vowel, it's okay.
It's a vowel, yes.
Thank you all so much. I'm not as tall as Cindy, so can you all hear me? Good. Well, thank you so much for having me, and it was such a joy to visit with you before the luncheon started and meeting some of you, hearing some of your stories. And we have an expression at the museum where we take people through and we call it siamo una famiglia. We are all a family. And I think very much with this group, it's very much the same. You are all a family. So I really thank you all for this invitation, Cindy. Thank you. So as Cindy mentioned, it's the Robert A. Facchina Italian-American Museum of Washington, D.C. We abbreviated, of course, because we're in Washington and we need an acronym. And the acronym is IAM-DC. And it's a play on words. I am is Italian-American, and then D.C. is self-explanatory. So IAM-DC. This afternoon, I'm going to tell you a little bit who we are, what we do, how we created the museum, which opened in January 2021. For tours. Using the slides, we're going to visit the museum and kind of give you a little bit of a virtual tour, and then picking some of the people on the slide, not all of them, so to tell you the story and the impact that the Italian and the Italian Americans had in helping shape the city. I think I have more to learn from you than you have to learn from me. It's very daunting to be with such a formidable group, but hopefully there will be some questions and I can answer your questions. You may have some other stories. I want to hear your stories as well. And in the back, I have set up a table with copies of our Italian-American newspaper, Voce, and some brochures on the museum and some information on how to reach us if you wish. As way of introducing you, who we are and setting the stage, thank you to Walter, who has been phenomenal. And this would not happen, your viewing experience would not happen without Walter, I have to tell you. So I'm so grateful. We're going to put you through about a 2.5 to 3 minute video that we created. We created this for a group of NATO spouses who were in Norfolk this past spring. And so it's about 2 or 3 minutes to introduce you to the museum.
The Robert A. Facchina Italian-American Museum of Washington, D.C. opened in January 2021 to honor the accomplishments, highlight the struggles, and pay tribute to the enduring legacy of Italians and Italian-Americans who helped settle, ornament, and build Washington, D.C., and who today continue to be a vibrant, creative, and indispensable part of the city. We are conveniently located in Northwest Washington, D.C., not far from the U.S. Capitol and the train station known as Union Station, 2 landmark buildings that reflect Italian and Italian-American creativity and artistry in their design and construction. Our museum focuses on how Italians and Italian-Americans influenced our nation's capital, shaping the city's architecture, the monuments, and the collections in its museums that are part of every visitor's experience and more. The story comes to life with our exhibition on the immigrant experience. Here, the visitor learns the story of Italian immigrants and their sons and daughters from the 1800s through 2020. As with many immigrant communities today, the focal point in the early 1900s was Holy Rosary Church. It was the center of the Italian immigrant community, and 110 years later, it continues to support the ever-changing Italian and Italian-American community. The church operates Casa Italiana Hall, an indoor piazza that is the home of many community events. On the premises are also the Casa Italiana Language School and the Italian Embassy-sponsored Casa Italiana Ente Promotore. We also pay tribute to the present by showcasing our community of artists. Our collection includes original works by more than 30 local artists, all who have donated their work. The museum is the cornerstone of our nonprofit organization, the Casa Italiana Socio-Cultural Center. We also publish a newspaper, Voce Italiana, provide internship and research opportunities to college-age students in our area, and have numerous events to promote the Italian culture in the Washington, D.C. area. The brochure you have received provides more information on our museum. We invite you to visit the museum and discover, explore, reflect, and celebrate the Italians and Italian Americans in Washington, D.C. We wish you a successful conference.
So hopefully that set the stage. Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this story, so we can go ahead and start the tour. So where are we? How are we? Where are we? How are we organized? I think a lot of you are very, very familiar with the area. So the museum is owned and operated by the Casa Italiana Sociocultural Center, Inc. We are a nonprofit. We're an independent public charity organization. We are housed in the Holy Rosary building called Centro Scalabrini, and it's a building on F Street near Georgetown Law School, Judiciary Square Metro, and the National Building Museum. Around the corner from us on 3rd Street is Holy Rosary Church and Casa Italiana. We also have the Lillian and Albert Small Capital Jewish Museum across the street and the German American Heritage Museum of the USA a few blocks away. So our programs, we as this nonprofit, of course, our keystone, our mainstay is the museum, the IMDC, but we also have other sociocultural programs that we participate in and that we run. We have an Italian Legacy Lecture Series. These are about 3 or 4 times a year where we bring in key speakers to talk about some of the issues that have affected Italian and Italian Americans. We have an Italian Legacy Research Grant. This is funds that we provide to college-age students in this area to do research and work for us and do articles. Some of the articles that appear in Voce have been written by them. We also have a Marconi project, which is our oral history project. Some of the interviews are already on our website. Voce Italiana newspaper, please feel free to take a copy. It's in English and in Italian. And then we collaborate with the other groups who use Casa Italiana and Holy Rosary Church to actually do several events. We do some events with the embassy. We do a lot of events honoring some of the holidays in Italy, as also in America. So the idea is born. So how do you start a museum? Well, you get on a committee. You're told by the president, come join, become one of the members. It's very easy. 4 times a year, no work whatsoever. Then it becomes a full-time job. How many of us have heard that? Yes. So if you've visited the area, you know that whole area, Capitol Crossing, is becoming regentrified. It's really up and coming. In 2018, the developers from Capitol Crossing wanted the church parking lot and the old rectory, which was sitting on F Street. Excuse me, the developers bought the land. Everything is sticking together here for me. They bought the land and also constructed this new building, the Centro Scalabrini. The pastor at the time, let me see if I can use this clicker, Father Ezio Marchetto, was a museum goer, and after every Sunday Mass, he would spend his whole day at the Smithsonian and other museums just kind of soaking in the art. So he turned to us and said, we need a little museum to kind of tell the story. Would you all do it? Of course, we did it. Then Robert Facchina, when we were looking, we have a founders fund, and we approached Robert Facchina, and his family were longtime parishioners. They were in the tile and terrazzo business. And he does not live here, but he continues to generously fund projects. And he actually funded the entire museum, hence his name on the wall. We started the design and the creation of the exhibit in early 2019. And we worked throughout the pandemic to build the museum. The curator, myself, a couple of other people, and our designer. We did a very soft opening at December of 2020 with the Italian Embassy. And I have to give a shout out. We have such a generous community of art galleries, art museums, and every curator that we spoke to get ideas, to get what do you do, what do you not do, was so generous with their time. It was just stunning. And of course, being a startup, they were like, what can we do? How can we help you? So it's a real shout out to this community of museums. We opened for guided tours. We're still open only for guided tours. In January of 2021, everyone who works at the museum works as a volunteer. This shows the early days. This is actually the original planning meeting. Different hairdo, but it is me. Our designer, who was wonderful, we found him through Hillwood Museum, because we were like, they were like, if you have a little bit of money, spend it on the best designer you can find. And we're like, well, do you have anybody? And they're like, yeah, how about using call ours? So this is how it all started, so it was great. And this is actually the first floor of our museum, the first lobby floor, and the map wall, which I'll get into, and you could see our buddy Constantino Brumidi here on the wall. So we really do talk about our themes. It's like, how do you form themes when you start doing the research and you realize it's all over the place? How do you pull it together when you have a really tiny space to showcase 250 years of accomplishments? So we focused on the themes of discovering some of the contributions that these Italian and Italian Americans made to designing, constructing, and beautifying the city, exploring some of their lives, what were their struggles, what were some of their achievements, reflecting on how Holy Rosary Church laid the foundation from 1913 and continues to support the community, and then celebrating the present and the future. Who are some of the artists that are Italian and Italian Americans? What are they doing now? And as we build this, and one of the things to think about, and it's funny when we have tours and muscle memory starts in, people come in and they're like, we don't know anything about our past. And all of a sudden you start talking and the muscle memory kicks in from their childhood and they start remembering. So it's the stories that we tell to remember, that we tell those stories, and that keeps the history alive for all of us. So, as we began our research, and we saw the space, and we saw some of the limitations, and we saw some of the time frames, we thought, what makes the Italian and the Italian-American influence in DC unique? We quickly found the answer with the monuments, the carvings, the Greco-Roman architecture, the Beaux-Arts look, the look and feel of the Capitol as you drive down. I cannot drive through the city without looking up and seeing a frieze on a building and thinking some little Italian was up there carving that frieze. I better pay attention. We soon realized that the work of the Italian stonemasons and the craftsmen did not exist in any kind of one book, one internet file or whatever. So we did a lot of digging and we did a lot of documenting, and we continue to find more. This slide features the first floor wall map with about 30 different locations. These locations are monuments, art, churches, and more. They were created or they were touched in some way by Italian artistry, Italian hands. So a few of the examples, and I'm going pretty quickly. So you'll see the Jefferson Memorial. Common, everybody knows that. They know about Jefferson's love for Palladio. Jefferson copied Palladio. This is actually taken from Villa Capra in the Veneto area. The Lincoln Memorial. The Lincoln Memorial was actually designed by Daniel Chester French, but Daniel Chester French would not take on a commission if the Piccirilli brothers in the Bronx in New York, 6 of them, were not available to do the work. So they actually carved the statue, the monument of Lincoln, in their Bronx studio and drove it down in 28 blocks and assembled it much like a Lego puzzle, seamlessly. That takes a lot. That takes a lot. Many of you, we were talking about how lucky we are to have so many museums free of charge. But, you know, we have this beautiful Leonardo da Vinci. We are the only Leonardo da Vinci holder in the Americas at the National Gallery. It's the only one. She actually came over on a plane, I think it was on a Pan American plane, in a luggage, in a piece of like travel or Samsonite luggage that was carved out to fit her little portrait. She came over with her own ticket, sitting on the seat, and she came over as Mrs. Modestini. So a little bit of trivia there. But the bronze statues, how many of you go up and down Memorial Bridge and see those beautiful 4 equestrian statues? Do you know the connection with Italy? It is so fascinating. These 4 equestrians represent peace and valor. They were sculptured in America, but they needed to go to Italy to be cast. It was right after the war. Italy suggested using money and funds from the Marshall Plan to cast the statues. They did. They were shipped from Milan to Norfolk. They were sailed up the Potomac on a U.S. Navy barge ship to D.C. There was this huge festival dedicating the 4 monuments. The statues were offered as a gift to the American people from Italy in gratitude for all of their support during World War II. President Truman was there, and that's when he pledged to remove certain of the sanctions imposed on Italy by the 1947 peace agreement. So they really have a lot of meaning to both America and Italy. So how to make sense of all of this? What was key? What was not? And then you have, when you're starting to do this, there's so much information. I really want to focus on the influence of our premier Italophile, Thomas Jefferson, because his influence on bringing Italians here to help ornament the city cannot be underestimated. Now, Jefferson had an ego, as most of them do, and he saw himself as the expert of great buildings of antiquity. He absorbed Andrea Palladio's treatise on architecture, adopting Palladio Roman architecture into the house he was building in Monticello. He loved Italian music. He even had an Italian dance teacher. He spoke Italian. He wrote in Italian. His gardening books were also in Italian. And through Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, who were busy negotiating commercial treatises, they brought over a gentleman named Filippo Mazzei. Mazzei was a businessman, and very learned, and also an entrepreneur. So Mazzei and Jefferson made an incredible connection and an incredible friendship. And as early as 1773, when Jefferson and his new friend, can I go back? I'm sorry, I flipped the wrong button here. One more, please. Mazzei is this little guy right here. He and Jefferson would actually sit in Monticello, drink some wine, some Nebbiolo grapes, and talk about all things Italian, but also Jefferson shared with him some of his concepts that he was working on as he was working on the Declaration of Independence. And there is a documentation where Mazzei wrote back to Jefferson in Italian and said to him basically, but aren't all men by nature are created free and independent? And what are the words that Jefferson used for the Declaration of Independence? All men are created equal. So it's a great friendship. In the early 1800s, Benjamin Latrobe was the architect of the Capitol, and they were drafting plans for the Capitol. Jefferson asked Latrobe to recruit skilled craftsmen to ornament the Capitol. Latrobe was like, we don't have any. So they got together again with Mazzei, and there is a letter that said, we are asking to recruit a good sculptor of architectural decorations. Italians were recruited through Jefferson and through Mazzei to ornament the Capitol. But there was also another thing that happened, and that happened in 1893 with the Chicago World Fair. One big takeaway from the fair was this gentleman right here, Daniel Hudson Burnham. He came up with this concept of the city beautiful. This became an urban planning movement that was focused on a return to classicism, order, harmony, structure. And what happened was at the fair, there was a city, and the city was lit up. It was like white stucco buildings, and they were lit up with 200,000 lights provided by Westinghouse, and the city became this glowing white city. And it gave him this idea of city beautiful. And when you drive down DC and you see all this beautiful pale tone marble from many different sources, whether it's from Bethel or Georgia or Indiana or Vermont, it gives the city this white unified look, and it looks as though it's glowing. In 1900, something closer to home was happening. We had the luck of a senator from Michigan named Senator James McMillan. James McMillan loved Washington, D.C., and he wanted to do something special for this city. And he gathered architects like Burnham, landscape architects like Olmsted and others, and had them do a survey in Europe of what constitutes a beautiful city. And from that was born the McMillan Plan. The McMillan Plan, this bird's eye view that looks like a cross, this is the National Mall and beyond. This is what still governs land use in Washington, D.C. for monuments. The idea was born, and I'll tell you, reading the documentation, you would think, boy, today's Congress has nothing on those guys. They had a special meeting. They invited Teddy Roosevelt to come and look at the plans. Teddy Roosevelt gave his nod. He thought they were great. They shoved them through Congress, and the McMillan Plan was born. The first building to be formulated under the guise of the McMillan Plan was Union Station, designed by, you got it, Mr. Burnham. It has all of the principles of Rome. It was the baths of the Diocletian baths were formed under those. They used Italian sculptors, And it took the entire inspiration was to create this monument to transportation. And if you go through Union Station and you look at the big 6 statues that form the facade, those were actually sculpted by an Italian, Andrea Bernusconi, and he used, they were to emulate and to perpetuate the themes of the Industrial Revolution, imagination, agriculture, electricity, and they were all carved by Andrea. Andrea's grandson moved here many, many years later and became a very successful entrepreneur, and if you've ever parked at PMI parking lot, that's his grandson. So there you go. But the clever Italians, it doesn't end there. So why is this building, the Watergate, which we all know, in this slide? Because the Italians were the first to introduce mixed-use development to DC. And they did that by sending a group known as SGI, spearheaded by an Italian named Giuseppe Cecchi, who died this past year from Milan. He brings his futurist architect with him, Luigi Moretti, and they do this incredible building. And it literally turned DC on its ear. The traditionalists were going nuts. The planning commission was going crazy. This is, we're going to lose the beautiful feel of our city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They made the concessions, but they had the money to do this. And one of the original plans of the Kennedy Center next door was supposed to be the 3 notes, and it was supposed to look very similar to this, but they ran out of money. But Moretti said, I've got the money, we've got the money, we're just going to do it. So the rest is history. So we can't talk about Italians, and thank you so much for the introduction on Joe Grano. I really appreciate it, Nelson. You should probably be up here doing this piece, if not more. But the Capitol looms large. It was the centerpiece, and again, in 1812, our friend Thomas Jefferson reached out to his buddy Mazzei and others to recruit more skilled stonemasons and carvers after the Capitol was sacked. So I just want to focus on the story of this corncob column. These corncob columns are still in existence, and they are at the entrance to the Senate basement, and it connects Italians of the 1800s to Italians of 2020, and the sculpture. The one in 1809 was one of the stoneworkers, Giuseppe Franzoni. He was tapped again by the architect of the Capitol, Benjamin Latrobe, to carve Latrobe's design. America was agrarian. They wanted to pay homage to one of the biggest crops in America, corn. And so he drew the thing, and Franzoni looked at it and said, I can do this for you. And he did. Franzoni learned his craft from his father, a stonemason in Carrara, Italy. Fast forward to 2020, we're putting the museum together, and we too want a corncob column. Well, we're not going to get one from the Capitol. Everything was closed. We called the architect of the Capitol, and we said, we have an Italian artist here who teaches at the Corcoran School of Art, and he is a master of 3D printing, and he would like to recreate the top of the corncob column for us with your permission. So they sent him 211 photographs, and he put it into his the special machine and did all of the mechanics for it. And so today we have this version, which looks very similar to the original version. And this is so light, you can pick it up with one hand. I'm not going to dwell on Brumidi because Nelson did such a lovely job, but Constantino Brumidi, the architect of the Capitol, the Michelangelo of the Capitol, I should say, as he was his moniker, he was legendary, and everyone goes and sees the beautiful dome and the apotheosis and the frieze around the dome. But if you ever have a chance to get a private tour of the Senate side buildings to see the Brumidi corridors, it is an opportunity to take. They are truly, truly beautiful. And of course, Joe Grano was responsible as a committed, concerned citizen to actually push for a Congressional Medal of Honor for Brumidi. So and that happened in 2012. We were very happy to do that. But this was his life work. He spent 25 years working at the Capitol. So, do you think it ends with the early 1900s? No, it doesn't. Today, we still have stonemasons, we still have carvers. So this slide, I want to introduce you to a couple of guys. Tony Volpe and his brother-in-law, and Roger Morigi and Vince Palumbo. Tony and his brother, Joe Musolino, came over in the 50s. In the 70s, they started a business, and in construction business. And in 1982, ground was broken for Maya Lin's controversial Vietnam Memorial Wall. And so who bids on the job? These two little Italian guys, Volpe and Musolino. They get the job. And they are the ones who actually were responsible for anchoring the entire wall. So one end faces the Lincoln Memorial, and the other one the Washington Monument. They did all that work. They did all of the stone work, and they laid all the sidewalks. They put up the statue of the three soldiers. And then if you go through Rock Creek Park, look at some of the stonework and the walkways there, because they did a lot of those as well. And also close to home, and many of you live nearby, the Washington National Cathedral. It is a monument to Italian ingenuity and artistry. Roger Morigi, this little guy here, and Vince Palumbo together spent a total of 61 years carving the cathedral. They carved thousands of statues, gargoyles, ornamental pieces, and Morigi, who had little guy but huge ego, his last piece before retirement was the figure of Adam that is part of the main altar at the cathedral. And on completing the sculpture, he famously declared, "I finished where God began." A little bit So you have to have a lot of chutzpah to say something like that. But their story, along with other carvers, was memorialized by Marjorie Hunt in a book and a documentary that won an Academy Award in 1985 and an Emmy for Best Directing in 1986. Now, these carvers were very grateful to her, and they immortalized her in a limestone carving of an angel high atop the cathedral's north tower. So next time you're there, ask to see the angel that looks like Marjorie Hunt. When we talk about this, we talk about the museum's second floor is where we are now. This whole floor is dedicated to the immigrant experience. And the timeline spans about 250 years, but what I want you to remember, this is the story of America, but it's the story of America told through the lens of the Italian and the Italian Americans who lived and worked in Washington, D.C. So you will see a lot of current events or events then that were all America, but how did the Italians interpret them? How did they experience them? Tony Volpe immigrated from southern Italy in the mid-1950s. At that time, D.C. was a time for growth. It was a time for our country of increased opportunities for Italian immigrants and their children who had a world war behind them. They had assimilated into the culture, and they had the opportunities provided largely by the GI Bill to go to school and to buy homes. But it didn't start out that way. And when you take a look at the literature and you take a look at what was documented, and you see this area, Swamp Poodle, which is where Union Station is now because it was cleared out to make way for Union Station. It was a wretched tenement area that existed. It was first occupied by the Irish. Apparently, and this is from Boundary Stones, it's a hybrid of a name of a swamp and a puddle because it was so wet and so swampy. And when you look at the description and you think there were only 74 registered Italian-born residents in D.C. D.C. never had a Little Italy because we were not a port city. We didn't have that kind. They came here with the skill, and they used that skill But the description, much like where Federal Triangle is now, DC was a rough and tumble area. It was a tenement. There was no infrastructure to speak of. It was cramped, unsanitary living conditions, but yet they came because it was opportunity and it was possibilities. There were a lot of skilled craftsmen who came, but there were also some skilled people and people who were very educated who came. And the one that I would like to focus on, who I just admire immensely, is this guy with this lovely mustache. So Tullio Suzzara Verdi. His family was one of wealth in Italy, and through their friend, Giuseppe Garibaldi, he landed a professorship at Brown University where he taught the Romance languages. He also studied medicine and received a medical degree and taught himself homeopathic medicine, moving to DC in the 1860s. He founded the Washington Homeopathic Medical Society in 1870, stipulating that anyone without regard to color could become a member. He was the target of many people from outside of DC, including Italians, and he was falsely accused of exploiting immigrant labor. But he spent a lot of time in the Swamp Poodle area, and he defended himself and the city's population at an 1890 congressional hearing. He testified, and these are his words, that unlike the Italians in New York, those living in DC that confronted social problems such as poverty, crime, family desertion, and public drunkenness were handled within the Italian community, largely because those who came to DC were skilled workers or would-be entrepreneurs. So you could see a lot more about him in the Voce magazines. I don't know why this is sticking. Okay, moving right. We also have, and people have been very generous. They have donated a lot of their artifacts, ephemera, and we're very proud of the timeline because it's really all original work that we've put together. So the story is really filled with ups and downs and the chances and the opportunities in grabbing those chances. Who knew that the president's Marine-owned band would have an Italian connection? Lincoln's Civil War has an Italian connection. Both presidents, Roosevelt also have a connection. But I want to just introduce you to one gentleman on this screen, and that is this guy right here. He is Charles J. Bonaparte. Yes, he is related to Napoleon Bonaparte. So he actually, in many ways, embodies all of the struggles and the success of this time period, and focuses a lot on what is happening today racially in this country. In the early 1900s, Bishop Scalabrini, here, who actually now the Scalabrinian priests are the ones who run Holy Rosary Church, was meeting with Teddy Roosevelt and talking about the plight of the Italian immigrant, among other things. We don't know what happened at that meeting, but shortly thereafter, Roosevelt taps Baltimore attorney Charles J. Bonaparte to serve as his Secretary of the Navy. He is a great nephew. His grandfather, Jerome, was Napoleon's brother. Jerome married a very wealthy Baltimorean woman and settled in Baltimore, and Charles became quite the attorney and fought for civil rights back in the 1900s. Roosevelt elevated him to U.S. Attorney General, and because of his civil rights and his reputation for social justice, he drew parallels wherever he went between the lynchings and the discriminations of the blacks and the Italian immigrants and what they endured, and declared again in his own words, they are not partially Americans, but Americans first, last, and all the time. Bonaparte, as AG, also broke the era's tobacco monopoly, earning the nickname Charlie the Crook Chaser. In 1908, he decided they needed a group to really fight this white-collar crime. That group is affectionately referred to today as the FBI. But the winds of change were not far behind. Some of these are pretty frightening photos that we found. In 1920, yes, World War I and the Spanish flu greatly decimated the number of Italians coming to this country. But there were still a lot of Italians in America, almost 4 million strong. And around the country, it started sparking nativist fears. Who are these people? What are they doing? They're taking our jobs. They can't speak the language. They look dirty. They're dark. Sound familiar? Anyway, this fear, along with the societal issues, gave rise to the eugenics movement in the US. The theory of eliminating racially inferior people like blacks, Italian, and Asians was gaining steam, and the movement, regrettably, had friends in Congress. In 1921, Congress establishes a quota system based on nationality and ethnicity. The flow of Italians went from 250,000 in 1921 per year to less than 10,000 per year in 1926. And then the Immigration Act was actually passed in 1924 to solidify that policy, and that Immigration Act was not repealed until 1968. And it was supposed to be signed by President Kennedy. Unfortunately, he was assassinated, but it was signed by Lyndon Johnson. This picture that we found in the files of the Klan marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's also in the Library of Congress. You can have files. They were marched against blacks, Italians, Jews, Catholics, and anything that had a social or political rights for immigrants. It's really, I think when you look at history, you realize we're not the first people to go through this now, and where it's just really cyclical. But the Italians survived. They formed groups. They had little businesses. This organization here, the Lido Civic Club, was formed in 1929 to give these Italian businessmen, and only men, a leg up, a hand up. They're still there today. They have done a lot to help promote Italian businesses, but now they're very clever. They have learned to pivot. So they're very engaged in other social causes, but they also, since 2000, they have given over $1 million in scholarships to students in this area. Now, I find this ironic that it was World War II that was really the turning point for Italian Americans in Washington, D.C. specifically. Because Mussolini's Italy had sided with Hitler, Italians and Italian Americans were seen as enemy aliens. Many, many, many Italian boys signed up to fight for their new country. As a matter of fact, so many signed up that Italian was the largest nationality group to sign up to serve in World War II. At the same time, many of the Italians and their families were carrying enemy alien cards. There are so many who distinguished themselves during World War II. You may recognize the name of Joseph Boggy. Joseph Boggy was 23 years old when he signed up, and he was the youngest beach master to land at Omaha Beach in Normandy on D-Day. He received a Bronze Star, but his collection is also at the Library of Congress, and he died recently, and I believe when they looked at inside his flak jacket, there was actually a portion of the schematics for the landing on Normandy in the jacket. So it's probably worth it to take a look. Though so many Italians assimilated, they took advantage of the GI Bill. They assimilated, they became quite successful in real estate. I'm going to introduce you to two little guys here. Raffaele Urciolo, who is, I don't have a picture of him, but many of you may recognize this as the Bloomingdale area of Washington, D.C. That area was redlined. In 1947, it was redlined. But Urciolo had friends who were black who wanted to buy a house there, and so he sold them a house. It did not sit well with several of the white homeowners. They sued Urciolo. He ends up taking, he ends up in the Supreme Court. He teams up with the NAACP, and they win the case. So this is a picture of the home, and this is a picture of the case of the Supreme Court decision. But it ended redlining in DC, which is important. On the other side, we have a little Italian American immigrant here. This, who was actually born here, this is Angelo Puglisi. Many of you may have heard of him. He owned a lot of property around DuPont Circle. But what he also owned and what he bought and refused to sell to anyone was this edifice here, which is Natural Bridge, which is a park now in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He ended up donating it to the Commonwealth right before he died. So when you talk to, I used to talk to Angelo, this very dapper gentleman here, and we'd like, Angelo, you sell everything, you're a realtor. And he says, no, my life, Minnie loves this place, and he says, but I keep it for one reason. Where but in America can a poor Sicilian boy, a son of immigrants, buy something that was once surveyed by George Washington and owned by Thomas Jefferson? So isn't that a great story? So yes. So if you ever go down there, take a look. Actually, you can find an etching where George Washington scratched his name into one of the rocks. So on the last note here, why these pictures of Lauren Bacall and Vice President Truman? Why this picture of John F. Kennedy? They're not Italian. No, they're not, but their photographs were taken by two Italians in this area. One of them, John DeJoseph, took this one here. He was one of many, many, many photographers present at that site. And then this gentleman here, Charles Del Vecchio, spent a lot of time in the JFK White House. Both were part of the White House Correspondents Association, each covering the White House, starting with Calvin Coolidge to JFK to Bill Clinton. Both men served the White House Correspondents Association with distinction, and during the Kennedy administration. This dinner in 1961 was for the outgoing presidents and the incoming presidents of the association. Both gentlemen were Italians, and Kennedy is said to have quipped at the 1961 dinner, "I am surrounded by Italians." So we fast forward this. So this is much more probably names and faces that you know. And in the 1960s to the present, there is an explosion of talent, opportunities for Italian and Italian Americans. How many of this, I've arranged them this way just to kind of take a look at them, but one of our guides has coined this term that we use. And you start in 1773 with the Italians, and you start with these sconosciuti. Sconosciuti are the strangers, the unknowns. You don't know their names. You don't know anything about them. And you end in 2020 with iconosciuti, or the known, the familiar. How many times do you open a newspaper, you open your, you're looking at the news, and you see these faces somewhere, someplace. And this is interesting lineup because it represents people appointed at the highest level of governments in all three branches, people who have succeeded in local politics. As a matter of fact, DC is a twin city with Rome due to the efforts of Mayor Adrian Fenty, whose mother is Italian. So we have so many little stories like this. Brumidi is finally recognized in 2012. The congressional delegation is formed. There's an Italian-American congressional delegation on the Hill, over 200 members strong. Not because they're all Italians, but because they have Italians in their districts. So you can see how many of these do you recognize, how many do you know, have you met them, have you worked for them? So anyway, that is the heart of our story, is the second floor with the immigration story. Very quickly, we have to really go to the third floor and take a look at the influence of Holy Rosary Church. Now, I want you to look at it through the lens, it's not so much as the Catholic faith or the Catholic religion, but what this church meant then in 1913 and continues to mean in terms of community. This is where immigrants came. Now remember, Italy did not have a standard language because Italy was not unified when they first came, so they probably couldn't even speak to one another. But the church was there. It started as a community center. It started as a church in a little townhouse, and in record time, it was built up into the church that we know today. So this gentleman here, Father DiCarlo, was not given a chance to do anything. He came as a young man. The bishop, it was then the Diocese of Baltimore, said, we need a church for Italians. So he started this, and this is actually the very first church. It's a rented townhouse on 3rd Street. 4 years later, he had the money to break ground and build this. And today it's still there. It was ornamented inside. So many Italians were craftsmen. They started, if you go inside, it's gold leafed. There's terrazzo tile. There's mosaics everywhere. Almost everything was done by the Italians, or they donated what they could not do themselves. So when you think about, and one of the things that, whatever your religion, it doesn't matter, but when you think about people sitting in these pews from 1913 to current day and praying for someone, celebrating a funeral, or celebrating a wedding, or going to a funeral, or saying prayers for someone in need, it's pretty dramatic what a magnet this church has been for them. So DiCarlo was there for over 50 years, and he built strong ties, but then he also passed the baton on to the Scalabrinian priests who are there today and who are operating the church. So this father, oops, I'm sorry, I keep turning the wrong one. We're almost at the end. One more. Father Cesare Donanzan was here, and he was could offer a course on collaboration and community engagement. And what he did is he wanted to start building not only the church, but he wanted to build the social collaborative part. So the Casa Italiana social cultural part was really due to him. That's when we had the language school, which is part of this building right here. This here is an indoor piazza where every Sunday after Mass you can go and have a coffee, you can go to different events. And then when he died in 1993, there were several pastors, but then the one in 2013 who came, Father Ezio, he really wanted to expand the socio-cultural component of the community, which he did, and it was his dream to have the museum, which is why we're here today. So, do we end all about the past? No, we end with a look towards the future. And this 4th floor, our last floor, is really dedicated to artists who continue the legacy. We have more than 30 artists, Italian Americans, who live in DC, Virginia, and Maryland. Some are full-time artists, professional, so others have taken it up as a hobby. All have donated their works. In this lobby, you can see Georgetown Law in the background, but we actually we end where we begin. We end with artists who work with their hands and who work with materials from the earth. We end with people who do ceramics, who do sculpture, and we have this beautiful pietra dura, which was actually a gift from our benefactor, Robert Facchina. If you've been to Florence, Italy, you're familiar with the technique of pietra dura, which is hard stone. This is actually a painting in stone. And it was done in 1921. And when I accidentally walked into the studio that is still there from the Renaissance, but different names, of course, and different owners. And I showed them our picture, and they pulled out this amazing book that they had put together. And the book shows this painting in stone, together with a huge array of items, including the huge 40-foot table at Hillwood Museum that is all done in pietra dura stone, that was done for Marjorie Post when she was creating and outfitting Mar-a-Lago. So we don't know if this was originally supposed to be one of the pieces shown to her, but it didn't end up in her collection. And lastly, let's see. So we have 2 galleries in addition to the lobby that are traditional art and more contemporary art. We have a huge array of media, from bronze, sculptures, mosaics, colored pencils, lithographs, oils. And so it's very small. We actually have a textile designer who is now back in Italy. So it's a very small collection, but one that we continue to work on. So I hope that you've learned something. I hope you've discovered something new, that you plan on visiting us. If you wish, if you reflect on our city's history, I hope that you now have another appreciation to add to your knowledge wealth about the Italian and the Italian Americans in our city, and that you look at all of these accomplishments and think about all the people who have stood on their shoulders and continue to do great work. So I don't know how much time I have remaining, not much, but
I think we have time for a few questions.
if you have time for a few questions, and also I want to hear from you if you have any stories to add. We're always looking to create more stories. Yes?
Do you have any stories about the Perna brothers, the bricklayers?
The Perna?
Yeah.
We are actually putting together a book, which hopefully will be out in 2025. I will ask if they have, I know the name, and I know that family name is still very active in Holy Rosary, but there's nothing in the museum on them. But if you have anything, I'm happy to collaborate.
Not a lot. There's a plaque for them on the cultural tourism walk of Tenleytown.
Okay.
And I have a blurb about them. on the
Okay,
walk.
okay. I'll have to look into that. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I heard that when the museum, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, was being planned, that the floor consisted of some type of stones that only the professionals in Italy, and they had to bring them from Italy to do it. Is that true?
Most of the stones that you see here, including the Kennedy Center, all came from Carrara, Italy. And it's up in there, it's where Michelangelo actually picked his great big piece of marble stone to carve the David. So the Carrara found are still there. You can still go, you can actually do a tour of Carrara, where a lot of marble, and if you look at Holy Rosary Church and you look around this city, there's so much of it is Carrara marble. I don't know if that floor is, but that would be interesting to find out. But if you've been to the Kennedy Center, John Kennedy was personally involved with the Italian government to get the Carrara marble for the facades of the Kennedy Center. 3,700 tons of marble was shipped here. It all came on barges. And recently, when they completed the Reach Center, if you've been to the Reach Center of the new part of the Kennedy Center, and you look at the gratitude wall, people who have donated, they actually tapped a company, Brett Rugo Stone, that is in Virginia. They went over to Carrara. They found the same area of marble that was used for the original Kennedy Center, and that's what they used to actually do the gratitude wall. So yes, everything, and as a matter of fact, all these monuments that you used to see before the Piccirilli brothers landed in New York, the sculptors had to send everything, maquettes, plaster molds, whatever, to Italy to be constructed. And so when the Piccirilli brothers came, there were 6 of them. They landed in the Bronx. They were known sculptors, and that's what the first of these sculptures were done here in the United States. But I'll check out that floor. Any other comments? Or yes, sir.
Just as an old librarian, this came to my. Oh, thank you. As an old librarian, this came to my mind. In case you were interested in what the Italians went through in World War II here, there's a book called La Storia Segreto, and it was written by the son of a woman who had been interned. And a lot of people don't know that the Italians went through hell on a wheel.
Yes, and were interned, yes.
And and that was her only crime, was she
Wow.
was an Italian.
Yeah.
By the thousands, whole families disappeared. And he wrote that because he was surprised himself that all we ever know about is what happened to the Japanese, but the Italians really caught it.
They suffered a lot, yeah.
It's called La Storia Segreto.
Yeah.
I can't remember who wrote it.
I've heard of it. I will find it. Actually, I don't know if any of you go up to Fort Meade or it used to be Camp Meade. Now it's Fort Meade, but they have. It was a prisoner of war camp, and they had 7,000 prisoners of war, both German and Italian. And they would segregate them, and you would get your assignment by if you would pledge your allegiance to America or not. And of course, the Italians pledged their allegiance to America, so they were in the sewing room and everything. But it was very, very active, and it was an active prisoner of war camp right here in our back door. And a lot of the Italians from the community would go there on Sunday and bring them, baskets with food or anything else that they needed. So it's a story that. The museum, I think, is closed, but it would be an interesting take. And when I visited the German and American Museum, they actually have the prisoner of war camp model that one of the prisoners did of that camp. And it was in Texas, and it apparently was not a very nice place to be. So the story. I'm telling it through the lens of the Italian immigrants but this story is for any ethnic group. And if you go to the Jewish Museum across the street from us, they too have a lovely timeline, and you see the parallels of the immigrant story just keeps repeating itself over and over again, regardless of your ethnic background. So we have to tell the stories. We have to make sure that the young people know these stories so we can not repeat some of the awful parts of it.
How many prisoners were in the camp?
In the Texas camp, I do not know. At Fort Meade, I believe at one time there were 7,000. I think, yeah.
Well, I think we're just about out of time.
Oh my God.
I want to give you, I have a certificate of appreciation that I would love to give you, and thank you so much. And I do want to say, and I think because the Barbuto family who are here, who are three generations
and
of Italians.
They made their Holy Communion at Holy Rosary.
At Holy Rosary. And so we do want to encourage you to tell your Italian-American story to the Marconi Project as well, so that we know, because while we don't think of DC as an immigrant city per se, we always have been and we still are.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are still here today as this part of our Italian-American community, it just looks differently than it always
and the immigrants
always
are different.
had.
Yeah,
and the immigrants are different.
Yeah.
So thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
Thank
So Liz,
you.
and please, we'll take some pictures. And please, we'll put her contact information on our website if you're interested in
also
seeing the
if you want to
museum.
take a little,
There's Voce Italiana
And there's
newspapers in the back, and some information about the museum if you'd like to come to visit it as well.
Exactly.
And I assume we can also invite everybody to have some espresso after Holy Rosary services anytime on any Sunday, and you can come to Holy Rosary. Thank you. Be safe, and we will see you in October. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I went longer.
Oh my God, this was